Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's February 12th. Today we celebrate the Dutch botanist who figured out that the king bee was actually a queen, and the poet gardener who preferred curves over straight lines. We'll learn about the evolutionist who started out as a staunch Christian and who once wrote, "I did not in the least doubt the strict and literal truth of every word in the Bible." Today's unearthed words feature thoughts about February, our shortest month. And we grow that garden library with a book that is brand new, just released officially today. And it encourages you to grow your fruits and vegetables in pots. I'll talk about a garden item that is just the coolest little gadget for growing seeds. And then we'll wrap things up with the backstory on a clematis you probably have in your garden, or your neighbor has it, or both. But first, let's catch up on a few recent events. Here's today's curated articles. First up was a post from Food Unfolded, and it was called How to Eat Edible Flowers. I said, one bite at a time. That's my dad's humor coming out. The post said, chamomile tastes like apples. Begonia has a sharp citrus flavor. Calendula goes peppery to bitter. Daylilies, a melony cucumber taste. And nasturtium is sweet and peppery. There's a lot to take in this post, but if you're curious about incorporating edible flowers into your garden and into your cooking, you might want to check this post out. Just search for the word edible in the Facebook group for the show, and this post will pop right up. Next up is actually a video. It features Penelope Hobhouse, who just won the 2020 Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society of Garden Designers. They did an interview with her, and it was just superb. Penelope said, "My feelings about good design is, first of all, the skeleton, the architecture. If you get the architecture right, you can fill it in with the plants you love." She said, "I was 82 or something like that when I came here." She's talking about her current place. She said, "I knew it was my last garden, and that's what really made me plant this as an architectural garden with flowers in between green architecture. I only wanted plants I really loved, and that's what I've done." And I thought that advice was so wonderful. We should all take a lesson from that. We shouldn't wait until we're at our last garden to figure that out. Plant the plants you love and focus on those. Aside from all of the wonderful advice that Penelope sprinkles in this short little YouTube video, it's just marvelous to see samples of all of the gardens that she's touched and had such an influence on over the years. Sarah Morgan, who's the chair of the Society of Garden Designers, said, "Penelope Hobhouse has influenced and inspired garden design for decades. Self-trained in practical horticulture and design, she nevertheless forged a hugely successful career thanks to her love and knowledge of plants and instinctive design talent." And I personally love Penelope's books, so you should check those out as well when you get a chance. If you'd like to watch this video, and I hope you get a chance to because it really is great, just search for the word Penelope, and this post will pop up. Now, if you'd like to check out these curated articles for yourself, you're in luck because I share all of the posts that I curate and share on the show in the Facebook group for the listener community for the show. So all you have to do to join this very free group, and it's completely spam free too, by the way, is to head on up to the search bar the next time you're in Facebook and then just search for the Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop up. You can request to join. That's going to make a notification come up on my phone. I'll see that you're a real person, and then I'll admit you into the group. It's just that easy. And then you'll get access to all of these articles. They'll show up in your feed. They'll be sprinkled in among the beautiful pictures of your friends and family. And then when a garden article strikes your fancy, you can check it out. I tend to pick articles that interest me, hoping that they interest you as well. So enjoy. Here's today's brevities. Today is the birthday of the Dutch biologist and entomologist Jan Swammerdam, who was born on this day in 1637. Before Jan's work, people believed that insects created spontaneously. Jan proved that insects were born from eggs laid by the female of the species, and that the larva, pupa, and adult were just different forms of the same species. After Jan dissected a female bee and discovered it had ovaries, he pronounced the head bee was a queen bee, quote, hitherto looked upon as a king. And here was Jan's description of male bees. He wrote, "The hive tolerates, during summer days of abundance, the embarrassing presence in the hive of 300 or 400 males, from whose ranks the queen about to be born shall select her lover. 300 or 400 foolish, clumsy, useless, noisy creatures who are pretentious, gluttonous, dirty, coarse, totally and scandalously idle, insatiable, and enormous." Well, that's pretty definitive. Jan's description of the hive's survival abilities is still as vibrant and relevant today. He wrote, "Should disaster befall the little republic, should the hive or the comb collapse, should man prove ignorant or brutal, should they suffer from famine, from cold or disease, and perish by thousands, it will still be almost invariably found that the queen will be safe and alive beneath the corpses of her faithful daughters." He continued, "For they will protect her and help her escape. Their bodies will provide both rampart and shelter. For her will be the last drop of honey, the wholesomest food. Break their comb 20 times in succession. Take 20 times from them their young and their food. You still shall never succeed in making them doubt of the future." Love that. And today is also the birthday of the poet and gardener William Mason, who was born on this day in 1724. The Reverend William Mason was also a writer, an artist, and a garden designer. Mason is remembered for creating the romance of the country house garden. Here's how he did it. In 1775, at Newnham, near Oxford, England, Mason designed a flower garden for his friend Lord Harcourt. To many, this garden was a turning point and marked the beginning of what came to be known as romantic flower gardening. What Mason accomplished was a radical change. Straight lines and borders and beds were out. Circular beds were in. With new elements in gardens like island beds, this meant that the plants were located away from the house. Instead, plantings and beds were located near outdoor garden buildings like temples or orangeries, or near a seating area. The garden at Newnham became a model for others. Mason's creation set the trend for English gardening, and Mason broadcast his ideas about romantic gardening in a very, very, very long poem called The English Garden. It was released in chunks over the span of a decade between 1772 and 1781. Mason's target audience were the wealthy garden owners of his time. He was speaking directly to them when he wrote, "Waste is not grandeur," and "A garden is the purest of human pleasures. It is the greatest refreshment to the spirit of man." Mason made many appeals to country estate owners, but his broad message was to throw out formal gardens in favor of romantic landscapes. Now, the word romantic simply means a landscape that is wild or natural. During this time of Mason, people referred to these romantic, natural, or wild landscapes as the picturesque garden. Today, gardeners delight in this little verse from Mason's poem. It offers simple, resonant advice from William Mason to you. It says, "Take thy plastic spade. It is thy pencil. Take thy seeds, thy plants. They are thy colors." Today is the birthday of the English naturalist and writer Charles Robert Darwin, who was born on this day in 1809. Darwin was born into a large Christian family in Victorian England. His dad was wealthy, he was a doctor, and an investor. For generations, Darwin's family were staunch abolitionists. Darwin's mother died when he was just 8 years old. Clever and curious, he managed to find solace in learning. When he went to college at Cambridge, he was planning to be a member of the clergy. He wrote, "I did not then in the least doubt the strict and literal truth of every word in the Bible." But then Darwin met a man who would become his mentor and friend, John Stevens Henslow. Henslow taught botany at Cambridge, and the two men enjoyed learning from each other as they took walks in the country. Their time together inspired Darwin and helped him to focus on his specialty, the natural world. It also opened the door to a strong wanderlust, a desire to see firsthand what the world had to offer. It was thanks to his friend Henslow that Darwin received an invitation to join Captain Robert Fitzroy on the HMS Beagle. Henslow had written a letter recommending Darwin for the journey, especially endorsing his likable personality. Once Darwin was officially asked to be part of Team Beagle, Henslow presented Darwin with a gift, a rare copy of Alexander von Humboldt's Travels in South America. In the book, Henslow had inscribed these words, J.S. Henslow to his friend C. Darwin on his departure from England upon a voyage around the world, 21st September, 1831. Darwin treasured this gift above all others, and at his death, the book was safely brought to Cambridge University Library, where it remains to this day. Darwin's 5-year journey on the HMS Beagle led him to think differently about his faith and his perspective on creation. It was October 2nd, 1836, before the HMS Beagle returned to England. Often, Darwin is depicted on the Beagle as an old man, but he was just 22 when he sailed away, and still a young 27 when he returned with boxes full of specimens and a brain swirling with new ideas. During the revelatory trip on the Beagle, Darwin had found the building blocks to his evolutionary theory in the many fossils and diverse species that he discovered on his excursions. In particular, his visit to the Galapagos Islands, which were largely untouched by man, they were pristine, was especially influential. And although people assume that Darwin had a light bulb moment during his time on the Beagle, his writing clearly shows that this was not the case. Darwin's thinking on the topic of creation and evolution matured as he grew older. Bear in mind that his paternal grandfather, Erasmus, had experienced big-time negative backlash for his own ideas on evolution. This made Darwin cautious, and it raised the stakes for going public with his own radical thoughts. To mitigate the risk, Darwin was methodical, and he worked to make an irrefutable case for evolution. Thus, it would take another 23 years after returning to England on the Beagle before Darwin was ready to publish his masterpiece, Origin of the Species. Now, if you ever get the chance to review a first edition online, you might be surprised to know that the word evolution isn't even mentioned. It wasn't until the 6th edition that the powerful word became synonymous with Darwin's work and was integrated into the text. Evolution. In Unearthed Words, here are some thoughts on February, the shortest month of the year. This first one's from the American Romantic poet William Cullen Bryant. The February sunshine steeps your boughs and tints the buds and swells the leaves within. Here's one from Cicely Mary Barker, the English illustrator of Fairies and Flowers. This was the poem that she wrote to accompany her snowdrop fairy. Deep sleeps the winter, cold, wet, and gray. Surely all the world is dead. Spring is far away. Wait. The world shall waken. It is not dead, for lo, the fair maids of February stand in the snow. And here's a poem called Yellow Jessamine from Constance Fenimore Woolson, the American novelist and poet, and a grandniece of James Fenimore Cooper. Here's Yellow Jessamine. In tangled wreath, in clustered gleaming stars, in floating, curling sprays, The golden flower comes shining through the woods these February days. Forth go all hearts, all hands from out the town to bring her gaily in, this wild, sweet princess of far Florida, the yellow jessamine. Here's a quote from Dr. J.R. Stockton, who was a professor of business statistics at the University of Texas. February is merely as long as is needed to pass the time until March. And here's an excerpt from Raising Demons from the American writer Shirley Hardy Jackson. February, when the days of winter seem endless and no amount of wistful recollecting can bring back any air of summer. And finally, here's a line from George Herbert, the Welsh poet, orator, and priest. February makes a bridge, and March breaks it. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Grow Fruit and Vegetables in Pots by Erin Bertelson. This book is hot off the shelf, brand new, just released today. Erin Bertelson is the gardener cook of England's Great Dixter in East Sussex, where the kitchen garden is an integral part of everything he does. In his new cookbook, Erin shares tips and tricks for potting up vegetables and preparing recipes from Grow Fruit and Vegetables in Pots, his brand new cookbook. This is such a great topic because so many of us have gardens where space is precious and limited. Following Erin's examples, we can expand our garden pots to include things like blueberries or eggplant. Erin has spent many seasons at Great Dixter, and for years he's refined his list of go-to vegetables and the various fruit specimens that he has learned to grow in containers. And now he's sharing that advice with all of us so that we can learn what crops will grow best in pots. Furthermore, as a cook, Erin also gives us his best advice on harvesting and cooking. This cookbook features over 50 wonderful recipes, and the photos of these incredible dishes are so inspiring that you're going to want to expand what you're growing so that you can try some of Erin's novel food ideas. Thanks to Erin, once again, we've learned that space is not an excuse to not garden, and it certainly isn't a barrier to creativity or variety when it comes to what we plant. We just have to think more strategically about our gardens and search more diligently for wonderful examples to follow. Erin and Great Dixter give us a wonderful blueprint for amping up the productivity in our garden space through the use of pots and the excitement that we can have in our own small garden spaces by following his lead. You can get a brand new copy of Grow Fruit and Vegetables in Pots by Erin Bertelson and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for $39.95. Brand new book, and it's fantastic. And here's today's great gift for a gardener. It's the Eschert Design Paper Pot Maker, and it's just $13.65. Escher Design says, our paper pot maker is part of a line that is for those who are passionate about gardening, cooking, and entertaining and have an eye for detail. Our paper pot maker is a clever tool that you can use to make seed pots from newspaper. It's fun. Instead of traditional flower pots that are made of clay or plastic or recycled materials, you can use homemade small paper pots. In no time at all, you'll be able to prepare a range of paper pots. And when the time comes to plant your young seedlings outside, you simply put them together with the paper pot in the ground, and the newspaper eventually goes away. It decomposes all by itself. When you buy the paper pot maker, you get the paper pot press and instructions on how to make the pots. This tool is one of my favorites. It's adorable. And you can get the Escher Design Paper Pot Maker and support the show using the link in today's show notes. It'll take you right to Amazon, where you can get one for yourself for just $13.65. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. I thought you'd enjoy learning a little bit about the family behind the ubiquitous Jackman clematis. It's the one with the large, dark purple flowers with yellow centers. And just an FYI, you can prune the Jackman clematis back in the fall without hurting next year's bloom. So don't sweat it. No worries. Anyway, today is the anniversary of the death of the English nurseryman, pomologist, florist, and clematis hybridizer George Jackman, who died on this day in 1869. George Jackman died at the age of 68, and there were multiple Georges in the family. Now, George I and his brother Henry were born into a nurseryman's family. In 1810, their father William founded Jackman Nursery on 150 acres in Woking, Surrey, England. George I and Henry grew up learning the business alongside their dad. By 1830, William had turned the business over to his sons. But after a few years, Henry decided he wasn't interested in running the struggling nursery, and he left it for George I. In the fall of 1834, George married Mary Ann Fremont. He was 33 years old, and in a little over 3 years, George II was born. The beginning of the year 1840 was a terrible time in the life of George I. He lost his wife Mary in January and his father William in February. In the span of just 25 days, George I and his 3-year-old son, George II, were alone. Needless to say, the nursery became the center of their world. The start of clematis hybridizing began 5 years before George I's life took such a dramatic turn. In 1835, about 35 miles from the Jackman Nursery, London's pineapple nursery, owned by John Andrew Henderson, created the first clematis hybrid. It was called Clematis hendersonii, and no doubt George I took notice. When George II was 13 years old, Robert Fortune brought Clematis lanuginosa to England. Native to China, the blooms on this clematis were larger than any ever seen before. If clematis blossoms were going to get bigger, the lanuginosa was the linchpin. By this point, George I was employing 35 men and 6 boys at the Jackman nursery. George II shadowed every aspect of the business, and he grew to be a shrewd owner-operator. As a young man, George II was energized at the thought of clematis hybridizing. And when he was just 21 years old, he crossed the Fortune lanuginosa with the Hendersonii, along with the climber atrorubens. In less than 6 months, the 2 Georges had 300 seedlings, and George Jackman II had an instant hit on his hands. The plant was hardy. It produced long-lasting, impressive flowers quickly, and the rootstock lasted for many years. The year was 1858, and the clematis Jackmanii was born. George II wrote, "Seedlings about 300, results of hybrids, very robust growers, abundant in flowers of rich, deep purple and maroon." Clematis Jackmanii went on to receive the Award of Garden Merit from the Royal Horticultural Society. And George II co-authored a book with Thomas More, the secretary of the Royal Horticultural Society. And the book was called Clematis as a Garden Flower. You can look through a copy of it for free online, and I put a link to it in today's show notes. George II and Thomas More dedicated their book to Her Royal Highness Princess Mary, the Duchess of Teck. The clematis was one of her favorite flowers. When George I died on this day in 1869, he had raised his son and he had turned his nursery into a success. And he had also served as chapel warden for his church, the Church of St. John, for over 2 decades. He started doing that a few years after losing his wife, Mary, Mrs. George Jackman. The Gardener's Chronicle said that George I died after a gout attack and was, by all accounts, a, quote, beloved, kind-hearted, genial Christian. It went on to say that his workmen, several of whom had been with him for 20, 30, or 40 years, followed his coffin to the churchyard for burial. And in 1967, the Jackman nursery was sold by a descendant, Roland Jackman. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.